The moisture-rising days after bereavement copy, Guyin fainted after working overtime, and then opened her eyes and dressed like a little farmer's daughter-in-law. There are only a stern and fierce mother-in-law and a peasized uncle left at home. Guyin does not suffer herself, relying on family craftsmanship to set up a stall and open a shop. A woman is still living a prosperous life. Seeing that life was getting better and better, her mother-in-law advised her to remarry while she was young. I also found an honest and beautiful poor scholar for her. Until July 15 of this year, a man who should have died in battle suddenly returned. Wu Qing'ai dedicated the first half of his life to his family and the world. He is worthy of his brothers and the world, and only his mother, young brother, and wife who died in the flood. The world was decided at the beginning. Wu Qing'ai was named the world's military marshal. The first thing was to go back to his hometown to find his family's grave. Unfortunately, the day he went back happened to be July 15. Daughter-in-law. There's a ghost. The old lady is still the most angry old lady in his memory. Sister-in-law, help. The younger brother is the younger brother who grew up in his fantasy. Don't bully my mother. A boy about 5 or 6 years old also rushed over. Wu Qing'ai? Who will explain to him? 8 years away from home, the child is 5 years old. What is the situation? Content label, commoner life through time and space, farming culture, food search keywords, protagonist, Kaihokyu, bookmark the author's column supporting role, forced to push his own finishing farming text, the wife of a sinner, others, pre-collect East Palace's concubine, where the imperial examination, the evil granny, one sentence introduction. The husband who died in battle after being a widow for 3 years is back in tension. Adversity does not suffer. VIP works. Brief comment. Gu Yinchuan, a modern girl, has become a little farmer's daughter-in-law with the same name and surname. The family has 4 walls, orphans and widows. Guyin did not suffer herself, and started from a small stall by relying on her family's handicrafts, step by step, until she opened a small shop and a restaurant later, and her life was getting better and better. After being a widow for 3 years, Guyin's dead in battle husband is back. This is a modern girl who travels back to ancient times. With her industrious hands, extraordinary craftsmanship, and kindness, she made a fortune, and won family, friendship. The love story, written in a simple and tender style, depicts many characters vividly, and from the perspective of the heroine Guyin alone, vividly and realistically depicts the living conditions of the people when the dynasties changed. In the middle of summer, there is no wind at all. From the moon to the mid-heaven, everything is silent. Thick clouds in the sky obscured the moonlight, leaving only a few dim stars. The night was dark like thick ink. The villagers in Batu village stopped early, and only the whimpering of the wind and the intermittent barking of dogs could be heard in the silent fields. After a few muffled thunders, a bolt of lightning pierced the night sky. A sneaky figure suddenly appeared in the field. He looked left and right, looked around, and after confirming that there was no one around, he arrived at the only house in the east of the village where the lights were still on, and tiptoed over the dirt wall. At this time, in this family's house, Guyin was lying on the kong, staring at a bean lamp on the table. Just a few days ago, she was still an ordinary person living in modern times. After graduating from college, she inherited the family's time-honored porridge shop. The porridge shop was left by Grandpa Guyin, so it stands to reason that this craft should be passed on to his son and daughter-in-law first. Unfortunately, Guyin's parents died in a car accident the year she was in college. In order to fully raise her grandfather's wish, Guyin gave up life in the big city after graduating from university and returned to her hometown. My grandfather passed away not long afterward, and Guyin was alone and devoted herself to the operation of the porridge shop. In the past 2 years, the business of Gu's time-honored porridge shop has become more and more prosperous. Guyin opened several branches in one go, but she fainted during overtime when she was about to make a big show. After the darkness, she opened her eyes and wore it to the present era, becoming a farmer's daughter-in-law with the same name and surname. Guyin here is much worse than her. After the stepmother gave birth to 2 sons, the family was even more poor. Later, she was almost 10 years old, and there was a locust plague in her hometown. Her father and stepmother fled here with several children. Although there is no disaster here, but the family's money is spent on the escape, and eating has become a problem. The stepmother could not tolerate her, so the pillow was handed 2 or 3 times, and Father Gu took the girl who was called Gu Dia to the side of the road and inserted a grass tag. On the same day, Gu Dia asked the Wu family from Batu village to buy it back. From the ancestors to this generation, the Wu family in Batu village are all farmers who shave food in the ground. But Wu King Ai, the eldest son of the family, was condemned by a wandering warlock a few years ago, saying that it was a solitary wicked life that beat his wife. There are many people in the village who believe in this kind of Shinto Taoism, and Wang's eyes are also high, and those who look a little worse can't get into her eyes. Therefore, although Wu King Ai was born tall and strong, with a handsome appearance, he did not say that he was married until he was 15 years old. Country people all get married early, and it is not uncommon to be a parent at the age of 14 or 5. Seeing that if he dragged his son down any longer, he would have to meet the married little widow, and the wife of the Wu family, Mrs. Wang, was so anxious that 2 fire bubbles rose from her mouth. As soon as the Wu family couples together, they plan to use all their savings to go to Renyaza to buy a child bride for their son. Then I happened to meet Gu Dia with a grass sign on the side of the road. But even the embarrassed description could not cover her beautiful facial features and clear eyes. The old man of the Gu family is also a good person. At that time, when he saw Wang's stop, he stepped forward to sell it, saying that his first wife who died was a maid from a big family, and his appearance was in them the countryside is notoriously good. Her own girl was brought up to be smart and clever. Although she looks worse when she is hungry now, the son of a dragon, a phoenix, and a mouse will burrow. This girl will definitely look bad in the future. No. And then quoted a very affordable price. The Wu family had saved up 12 taels of silver to buy a decent maid, but Gu Dia in front of her only cost half the price. How could this not make people excited? However, after scrutinizing Gu Dia carefully, Mrs. Wang still showed a dissatisfied appearance, saying that she looked so young, but her son was 15. How many years and how much food does it take to be a daughter-in-law? Although the girls in Renyazi are a little more expensive, there are many older, grown-up girls, and they can make a difference if you buy them. Because of this, Gu's father lowered the price again, and finally made the deal for 4 taels of silver. Gu Dia became a family member of Wu, and Gu's father left here with his wife and son the day he got the silver. Wang saved a lot of money and was in a good mood, and immediately took Gu Dia to change into new clothes. On the way, he met a poor scholar who wrote documents for people, and asked people to pay for her. A new name was given, which is the origin of Guyin's slightly literary name. Afterwards, Guyin arrived at the Wu family. Wu King Ai was so fashionable and didn't know her parents' plans, but only when she saw more people in the family knew that this little girl was her future daughter-in-law. The little girl said she was 10 years old, but she looked like he was a generation behind him. Where does he want to? In addition, Wu King Ai is also open-minded, and he has long thought that since he has conquered others, he will live alone for a lifetime. Anyway, his parents are young, and he can always add children to the family and continue the incense. Get married. Wang was full of joy, and only felt that the 4 taels of silver he spent were worth it. As far as Guyin's appearance is concerned, not to mention the 8 villages in 10 miles, there are few people in the county who are more beautiful than her. It was also in this year that the imperial court suddenly began to recruit strong men into the army to attack the rebels. Wang Shi, who was pregnant at the time, was in flames, but there was nothing he could do. He could only watch his man and eldest son being recruited. Before parting, Wang insisted that Wu Dalan and Guyin worship heaven and earth. Wu King Ai can also be regarded as self-restraint and observance. He did nothing to Guyin that night when he entered the bridal chamber, and told her apologetically, "Mother is still pregnant, and my father and I are leaving again. Now, I'm afraid she won't be able to bear the blow, so I have to accept her. I'm going to have a lot of misfortune, and this is just an expedient measure to fulfill my mother's wish. If I have my life to come back, I will naturally treat you well for the rest of my life. If you don't come back, you can get married on your own in 2 years. My mother is fierce and soft-hearted, so she will naturally not embarrass you at that time. Wu Qing has been in school for a few years, and when he speaks eloquently. After the sudden change at home, the original Guyan is even more dazed, and he doesn't understand the meaning of his words at all. He only remembered every word he said in his heart, and responded heavily. After half a year, Wang gave birth to a young son, named Wuan. Since then, the three of them have depended on each other for life. Although life was hard, in the end, Wang Shi and Guyan were both able to work, and they finally survived for 5 years. However, I didn't expect it. The news came from the previous one, saying that the army of the imperial court on the front line was completely wiped out by the rebels. Isn't the front line where Wu Dad and Wu King Ai were recruited? Although Wang Shi and Guyan were already psychologically prepared, they were so shocked that they fainted when they heard the news. Wang's body was in good shape, and she woke up after a while after fainting. Poor Guyan couldn't stand things at a young age, so she fell ill. A high fever broke out, and now Guyan passed through. After sorting out her thoughts, Guyan couldn't help sighing. As a modern person, I have read a lot of novels and TV dramas that travel through the air. But in general, even if you go through it, even if it is not a lady or a lady, that is the court marquis, you must have a younger brother/fiancé who is dedicated to the scientific examination, that is the imperial examination and farming. Well, she came across as a child bride, and also a little widow, but she has a little brother-in-law, but Wu An's child suffered great changes before he was born. Now he is 5 years old. I haven't read a day, and I'm still illiterate. The road ahead is very difficult. Guyan couldn't help but sigh again. At this moment, the door of the house creaked open, and a woman with a thorn in a cloth skirt came in. The woman looked less than 40, and her face was still somewhat youthful, but with long eyebrows and dangling eyes, and there were 2 ravine-like nasolabial lines on her face, which added to regardless of the age of the young man, he still looks very difficult to get along with. It is the original adoptive mother and mother-in-law Wang. Wang threw the medicine bowl heavily on the table, and when she saw her, she scolded, "I heard you sigh dozens of times in the room in less than a stick of incense. I don't know how much trouble our family has suffered." Immediately, Mrs. Wang thought that her man and eldest son should be gone. Didn't he suffer a great disaster? But the head of her family didn't act like Guyan, and she became more and more impatient, her face became a bit more fierce, and she slapped the table in a vicious voice, "Get up and take medicine, why are you still waiting for me to serve you?" The original Guyan was very afraid of Wang. Although Wang's treatment of her is not as good as her own son, but she did not spar with her like her stepmother, it should not be the case. But Mrs. Wang has a fierce appearance, a loud voice, and a sharp tongue. She can scold people for dozens of sentences without any heavy words. The text is done at the school. The timid original body was stunned for a moment. Of course, there is not only one person who is afraid of Wang's family. There is almost no one who can scold Wang's family in Batu village. Guyan was not very afraid of her, but felt that what the eldest son of the Wu family had said was right, and Mrs. Wang was hard-mouthed and soft-hearted. Otherwise, I won't talk about it. I will say that after hearing the bad news, I have this disease, and I have been in bed for more than a month. Looking for a doctor and asking for medicine has hollowed out the last family of the Wu family. As long as Wang's heart is cruel, she should have cut off the medicine to save money and let the original body fend for itself, and it is not her turn to replace the original body to live this life. Wang became more and more angry when she saw her getting up slowly, the table clacked and the medicine bowl jumped twice. Yelling, "Sister-in-law is sick!" Wang was in a bad mood, and she was indifferent to her son, you know it in the middle of the night? Your mother, I worked outside for a day, and I have to give it to others after working in the fields. Washing clothes at home, you have to make medicine for your sister-in-law when you come back, but you are busy until now? You also know that your sister-in-law is sick and can't get out of bed, so she will be a young master in the house with her feet up. This is an injustice. In the past, Wang did the most work at home, Guyin was the second, and the young Wu was the third. Which child of this age is not playing around outside? Only Xiao Wuan was more sensible than others since he was a child. He was diligent and capable. When he said that he was taking care of his sister-in-law, he would watch him every step of the way. In terms of properness and meticulousness, most adults couldn't compare to him. The job of decoction was originally told by Wuan that he came, but the others had little experience. Wang Shi was afraid that he would waste the medicinal materials of Jingui, and repeatedly emphasized that he had to wait for his return to decoct. However, knowing that her mother is in a bad mood, Wuan didn't argue, she just smiled and said, I'll be sleepy when I wait for the evening meal, I'll go back to the Kong and lie down. The mother should come back as soon as possible. Just call me, and I'll go to my mother for dinner. Listening to what he said, Wang's anger also went down halfway, the table didn't pat, and the eyes didn't fire anymore. First, he said that he would go to the hot meal, and then he said that Wuan would give it to Guyin. Feed the medicine, and then let Guyin not struggle to get down to the ground, don't get sick after getting better soon. As soon as she gave the order, Mrs. Wang went out again. My mother is like this, I still care about my sister-in-law. Xiao Wuan smiled at Guyin again, and sat on the edge of the counter with the medicine bowl in her hand. Sister-in-law, don't take it to heart, you will not be sick when you are sick. Very emotional. Can be flush with the desktop. Seeing him standing on tiptoe, holding the medicine bowl in his small hands and handing it to him, his dark little face is full of genuine concern, Guyin's heart softened, and he also smiled. First, he poured 2 or 3 mouthfuls of the decoction into his hand, and said, I can save it. Children of this age are already snooze, and he is always busy taking care of himself during the day. Guyin sees that he can't bear to pull him onto the Kong, and takes off his small shoes, let him sleep in his bed. Xiao Wuan was so sleepy that he couldn't open his eyes, but he still said, Mother said that I'm getting older, so I'm not as tired of my sister-in-law as I used to be. Guyin covered him with the thin quilt, patted his chest with one hand, and coaxed softly, just squint for a while, and when mother is done, let her carry you back to the house go. The two were talking when they heard a sudden sound in the quiet night. I'm afraid I miss another bowl. Wuan closed his eyes and muttered, then turned over and started snoring. Wang has a fiery temperament and is a little irritable at work. Guyin also smiled. Guyin's heart was beating wildly, and she faintly felt that the situation was wrong. Guyin glanced at Xiao Wuan who was sleeping soundly, then got out of bed and walked out of the house, lightly walking to the stove. Mother, what's the matter with you? Did you beat the bowl? Guyin asked at the door in a normal tone. Unable to wait for the response from inside, Guyin touched the gavel for washing clothes in the yard and took it in her hand. Hearing the voice outside, the man whispered, if you don't want your son to die, just give it to me. Don't look at the way Wang Shi was talking to Guyin and the others just now, but at this time, she was frightened and fighting with cold sweat. She recognized the man in front of her as Li Daniu, a gangster in the village. As the name suggests, Li Daniu is as strong as a cow. But because his uncle is the right man in this room, he has no children under his knees, and it hurts so much that he treats him as his own son. Although the people in the village are tired of him, no one dares to do anything to him. In the past, the Wu family had 2 strong laborers, especially Wu King Ai, who was naturally strong and could crack rocks with his bare hands at the age of 15. A few days ago, I heard the news that the men of the Wu family were gone, so Li Daniu moved his thoughts and waited for a dark night when he could not see his fingers, and touched the Wu family. Li Daniu originally came for Gu Yin, but looking at Wang in the dim light, he felt a little different. Immediately, he thought again, now there is only a 5-year-old child in this family, as long as Gu Yin is tricked in, isn't the mother-in-law and daughter-in-law letting him do anything? He laughed evilly, and said, how about letting your daughter-in-law come in and I'll let you and your son go? Wang clenched his teeth in fear. Li Daniu saw that Wang Shi refused to open his mouth, and the expression on his face became a bit fierce. Just as they were at a stalemate, they saw that the door of the kitchen room was suddenly knocked open. Li Daniu was guilty of being a thief. Wang seized the opportunity to break free from his shackles, and shouted help at the top of his voice. Wang's voice was always loud, and the cry for help was so loud that it was no exaggeration to say that it broke through the sky. However, unfortunately, a thunderstorm sounded outside at the same time, and then pouring rain poured down, completely blocking Wang's voice. Double-sized raindrops crackled. Li Daniu secretly said God help me, then turned around and slapped Wang Shi directly, and was about to slap Wang Shi directly to the side. Hand beat her to death. But before he could do it, he suddenly felt a pain in the back of his head. It turned out that when the thunder sounded, Gu Yin silently came behind him, and used all her strength to hit Li Daniu on the back of the head with the mallet in her hand. However, Gu Yin, who had just recovered from a serious illness, had no strength at all, and Li Daniu staggered twice to stabilize her figure. He turned his head and glanced at Gu Yin, who was still holding a gavel a few steps away, and smiled contemptuously, I usually don't know that you are so fierce. This kind of chaste martyr is delicious. After that, he ran towards Gu Yin again. Mr. Wang, whose mouth was full of blood, just got up from the ground, and seeing that the situation was not right, she immediately hugged Li Daniu's waist from behind, and shouted to Gu Yin, what are you doing here? Why don't you run with Wuan? Gu Yin was calm in the face of danger, and said solemnly, Wuan has already left the house to call for help. Don't worry, mother, someone will come to take this thief soon. Li Daniu was not annoyed by Wang's tripping, instead he said with a strange smile, why do you scare me, little lady? Your home is at least 2/4 of an hour back and forth from other people's homes, and now every family is sleeping again. The incense. Even if you call the Wu family child out, but today it is windy and rainy outside, and the Wu family child is weak like a chicken, it will take half an hour to run out to find someone for help. Right? You say, is this half an hour enough for me to succeed? Gu Yin was just bluffing to frighten him, but he didn't expect that this man who looked empty and had no brains would not be so easy to deceive. What are you talking about, you idiot, don't run. Blood flowed from Wang's mouth, and his eyes were red with anxiety. But Gu Yin knew that she could not withdraw. The original body owes Wang's upbringing. As soon as Wang's words came out, a strong reluctance emerged in her subconscious. This should be the last remaining consciousness of the original body. How can Gu Yin do the unethical thing that goes against the will of the original body after taking over someone else's body? Not to mention that since he beat her into the house, Li Daniu's eyes seemed to stick to her. Want to know that his main target is her? How long can Wang hold him? At that time, I was afraid that it was not enough for Gu Yin to escape. Li Daniu was stunned when he looked at her face. This child bride of the Wu family is really the most beautiful in this 10 mile and 8 townships. It's not a waste of his risk to come and pick this delicate flower. And Li Daniu also thought about it, as long as he succeeds, if he breaks Gu Yin's body, the women will have the same name, as long as this little lady of the Wu family is not too stupid, she will not make things too big. Besides, most of the men in the village are gone, and when his uncle helps him, he will naturally be able to completely cover up this matter, and maybe he will be able to take over the women in the entire village from now on. Li Daniu stared at Gu Yin madly, no longer vicious, but softened his voice, learning to make up nonsense like a scholar in a book. Little lady, I'm not that you should know me, I'm Lichun's nephew. Our Li family is a local surname. Speaking of which, the magistrate in the county town is still a relative of my family. You are here today. Tomorrow I will carry a large sedan chair to marry you. Instead of being a little widow in the Wu family, why not marry me? I will keep your favorite and spicy food for the rest of your life. These words are naturally made up indiscriminately. No matter how good-looking Guyan is, she is a little widow who married someone. Moreover, Wu King I's reputation is also poor, saying that he is Tian Chiguxing, he just wants to touch Guyan's body, and he does not dare to take this Tian Chiguxing's daughter-in-law home. After listening to him, Guyan frowned, as if she was really thinking about what he said. Li Daniu continued patiently, usually I can't look at the 4 or 6, but I promise that as long as we get married, I will let my uncle find me an errand, work hard, do well waiting for you. It's not my original intention to use force for this time, I really love you for a long time. Guyan bit her lip and hesitated, I understand your sincerity, but you are looked down upon without a match. You are right, my man is already dead, I can't live without it. It's a tasteless widow's life. Why don't you go back and make an agreement with your family that tomorrow you will come to propose marriage? When Li Daniu said these words, Li Daniu did not respond, and Wang Shi was already angrily and scolded, you understand the fart. Good you gu dia, the old lady works so hard to pull you so big, if you turn around, you will have a private life with a wild man. Guyan replied angrily, although you have raised me for all these years, I haven't eaten at your house for all these years, so when is it not dawn to get up and work with you? You didn't buy me, maybe I'll let a big family buy it. I heard that the maid of the big family wears gold and silver, and has the opportunity to be the aunt of the master's family. Is it better than the average lady? Speaking of this, Guyan glared at Wang Shi angrily, as if she really hated her for a long time, and it was only today that she had a sudden attack. Wang was so angry that he stopped holding Li Daniu's waist, and threw his hands at Guyan. The mother-in-law and daughter-in-law scuffled all the way from the stove door to the stove. Li Daniu was also stunned. He never expected that Guyan's attitude would change so quickly, nor did he expect that Wang would sacrifice his life to save Guyan. Wang's reputation is very strong. After Li Daniu reacted, he was afraid that he would break the little lady who was going to succeed, so he hurried forward to fight. However, just as he grabbed one in one hand, he suddenly felt a chill in his chest. He looked down in a daze, and saw that the kitchen knife on the stove had been inserted into his chest at some point. Li Daniu fell down like a mountain. Guyan and Wang Shi were panting and frightened. I killed someone. Wang was also stunned, and the kitchen knife in his hand fell to the ground with a clatter. Guyan closed her eyes, stabilized her mind, and then leaned down to touch Li Daniu's breath and pulse. Don't be afraid, people are not dead. Wang was so frightened that she could not stand still, and only stabilized her body by holding on to the stove. Seeing her face pale with fright, Guyan turned to praise and said, Mother is so delicate and sweet, I just said something like that, but it was my expedient measure that you reacted immediately. Wang received the compliment, trembled, and said proudly, You were raised by me, how could I not know you? Just now she heard what Guyan said was very wrong, as if she was deliberately angering her. After she rushed over, Guyan gave her a wink, Wang Shi immediately understood, and the two scuffled together. Guyan took her all the way to the stove, and before she could reach out, Mrs. Wang quickly grabbed the kitchen knife in her hand. Thinking that her daughter-in-law, who has always been cowardly and only knew to hide behind her when encountering trouble, was quick-wit this time, and Wang realized that being a mother-in-law could not be defeated, so she forced herself to calm down. Seeing that the fear on her face disappeared, and she could listen to others, Guyan first took the kitchen knife and handed it to Wang Shi. Our kitchen knife is dull, only the tip is stained. A little blood. Then she squatted down again, pointed to the wound on Li Daniu's chest and said, This wound is only a finger long, the amount of bleeding is very small, it can only be regarded as a bit of oily skin, this person should be shocked and fainted of. Wang looked down and saw that the wound on Li Daniu's chest was no more than the length of a thumb, and the blood was only smeared on the front of the clothes. The blood stopped by itself when she spoke, and it was less than the blood flowing from her mouth. Woolen cloth. Guyan couldn't help but glanced at Wang Shi with tears in her eyes. In fact, at first she meant to find an opportunity to use a kitchen knife to scare Li Daniel back. After all, no matter how strong Li Daniel is, he is only barehanded, and it is one person against the two of them. Wang has always been strong, and ordinary men can't compare to her in work. She would be restrained so easily. It was purely because Li Daniu had the intention to calculate without intention, and seized the opportunity. As long as you get the kitchen knife, Li Daniu will not be good for the two of them. Change it another way. But I didn't expect that my mother-in-law would grab the kitchen knife and hit Li Daniu hard. He cut someone but was scared like this. Then what should we do now? Wang Shi, who was relieved, asked Guyan unconsciously. Guyan went to the corner of the kitchen to find a hemp rope, and while tying Li Daniu, she said, "Tie the person first, and then take him to the officials when it is dawn." Wang has regained her composure at this time, and she just felt that she had lost face because of her messy appearance. After hearing this, she spit blood at Li Daniu and hummed, "You still, he is too young. This beast was just right. There are people in his Li family. Today, he was injured in our house. It doesn't matter if he did it first, our family fell into their hands, and he didn't die. Gotta peel back." She also helped, and the two quickly tied Li Daniu firmly. Li Daniu's eyes moved in a short while, and he was about to wake up. Mrs. Wang picked up the laundry mallet that Guyan had dropped before, and sturdily slammed it on the back of Wang Daniu's head. People were knocked out. At this time, Xiao Wuan in the house was already awake. Seeing that they were all coming back from outside, he rubbed his eyes and asked them what they were doing. Wang covered his injured half of his face with a towel, and told his children to stay out of business. Guyan comforted her warmly, "It's nothing, it's just raining heavily outside. Mother and I were worried that the roof would be damaged, so we went out and took a look." Wuan was so sleepy he couldn't open his eyes. He was quickly infected by Guyan's calm mood, and he lay back in the bed and fell asleep. Seeing that he was fast asleep, Guyan thought about the next countermeasures. She first traveled, and her understanding of this era came from the original body's memory, but the original body was young and had little experience and knew little about the outside world. Only one thing is certain, this court is rotten to the core from top to bottom, otherwise it would not be able to forcefully recruit all the men of the poor family, and not leave a bastard. Not to mention that the people quietly call the rebels, and look forward to the situation where the rebels overthrow the imperial court. It's really useless to catch the thief and see the official. Let's go back to my mother's house. After being relatively speechless for a long time, Mr. Wang said, "There are only those who are thieves for 1,000 days, and there is no one who prevents thieves for 1,000 days. It's hard to say next time. Anyway, your father-in-law and King Ai are gone, and our family has nothing to worry about in this Bata village. Now that this kind of thing happened again, we simply moved out with the whole family. After this village, this county is nothing." Wang is used to being a family man. She will listen to Guyan when she is in a panic. Now she doesn't say anything more after she has made up her mind. She also called Wuan, which is even more different. What did he explain? Just let everyone move and pack up all their accompanying things. Guyan lived in the house of the eldest son of the original Wu family. Although it was the largest house in the family, the Wu family was originally a wealthy farmer. Yin fell ill again, the most valuable fields in the family were sold, and there were no other valuables in the house. Guyan only packed a few of her own clothes. Wuan quickly packed his own little baggage, and he had even less things, and the package was smaller than Guyan's. The two waited in the main room for a long time, but the Wang family did not come. Piri. Guyan helped her forward helplessly, "They are going out for refuge. Packing up so many things, they are two big and one small, a total of 3 people, how can they bring it up? Seeing that she was hesitant to say anything, Mrs. Wang said, you don't know how expensive it is to be at home. Although these things are old, they are all used to everyday use. As the old saying goes, staying at home is good for 1,000 days. It's hard to go out for half a day. Why don't you want money outside? Do you still spend money to buy a new one? Guyan put Wuan aside, and then persuaded, it is urgent to follow the right, we are going out to evacuate, how can we bring so many things? Wang also knew that it was inconvenient to take these on the road, but still said, you don't have to worry about it, I don't need you, I will take care of it myself. She did have that strength, so Guyan did not continue to persuade her. When it was dawn, the 3 of them were all ready. But because they were fleeing, Wang and Guyan did not dare to stay. Wang took the burdens from Guyan and Wuan on their backs, and gave Guyan the only robe in the family. Guyan was so frightened last night that she was sweating all over, and by this morning, all the sickness on her body had disappeared. She was about to resign, but was scolded by Wang Shi again, and finally she could not help but tell her to put it on. Guyan refused, but she carried a little Wuan under her robe. The little guy was not happy at first, and said with his hands twisted, I can go by myself when I grow up. My sister-in-law's illness is just fine, so I can't bear it anymore. Guyan couldn't do what Wang did, although it was for the good of others, but not forcing people to respond. She winked at him and said, I'm just sick, and I don't have any symptoms on my body. Strength, you have to walk slowly on the road in a while. Mother will definitely scold me at that time, if I carry you on my back, won't I have a reason at that time? Xiao Wuan lay on her back obediently, but still did not forget to tell her, if sister-in-law feels tired, she must put me down immediately. Guyan stood up and turned him upside down, only to think that the little guy on his back was not as heavy as a big watermelon. The 3 of them left Bata village, until the sky was bright, and the wind and rain were so strong that the umbrella in Wang's hand was overturned. In the end, there was no way, Wang found a nearby barren mountain rest in the broken temple. At this time, those guys brought by Wang came in handy. I saw that she first gathered the hay in the ruined temple, then took out the fire stick to set it on fire, and then folded the branches to form a simple shelf, and finally put my own pottery pot on the clip, pour clean water from the water bag, and finally take out the slices in the small cloth bag, and cook the soup on the spot. The water in the clay pot boiled not long, making a gudu-gudu sound, accompanied by the majestic and powerful sound of raindrops outside. Guyan felt relaxed. At this moment, a loud boom suddenly came from the sky, just like a muffled thunder blasting in the ear, and the 3 of them trembled. This thunder is too terrible. Wang muttered. This torrential rain lasted for half a month, and finally turned into a rain disaster. The dam upstream of Bata village was in disrepair for a long time, and finally overwhelmed all the beds. The rebel army played the banner of the monarch is tyrannical, the law of heaven is unbearable, and the momentum has become more and more powerful. And a month after Guyan and the others left, a team of people in disguise quietly came to the vicinity of Bata village. They were a group of 10 people, all dressed in black outfits, their movements were uniform and well trained. The man headed by him is in his early 20s, with be-waisted arms, a burly stature, a tough face, and a thumb-length scar on his side face near the cochlea, which does not diminish his handsomeness, but adds a touch of it. Sharp. A group of them came at a gallop overnight, and they had seen countless tragic situations along the way, all of them looked solemn. And the man at the head looked even more grief-stricken with a hint of grey defeat. He jumped off the horse and threw himself into the ruins that could no longer be seen. He stood in panic and stood in the devastated place, and began to dig with his sword first, and then simply dig with his bare hands. How many casualties were there? In fact, when they came, they inquired about the news. The dam collapsed, and Bata village bore the brunt, and no one survived. The local officials fled long ago, and the bodies of the people on this side were swept away by the flood, and no one came to count the casualties. But he also knew that in the small village in front of him there was their chief's family. When faced with this kind of situation, people will always want to do something, even if they are futile in the end, they will feel better. But no matter what, it's still better than being so crazy right now. Or your family just happened to be away and got away. The man finally calmed down, he shook his head slowly, his movements sluggish like a puppet. It took a long time before the man said in a hoarse voice, "My mother came from a distant marriage, because the elders are not in harmony, and have not been in contact for many years. In addition, my son is cowardly, and my younger brother is even younger. They don't just go elsewhere." When he said this, his voice became more and more low, like a rotten tree, and a blood mass in his throat. The people accompanying him did not know how to comfort him, so they turned their heads. "Eyes, now that we know the result, we won't stop here, don't miss the big event of King Righteousness. This man is Wu King Ai, the eldest son of the Wu family who was forced into the army. It was winter when he left home, and he encountered heavy snow before he joined the army. The mountain was covered by heavy snow, and more than half of them died of frostbite. Delaying the timing was the crime of beheading, so the prison army simply ignored these recruits and ran for their lives. I thought there was no way out, but they were lucky enough to meet King Yi. The righteous king saved them, but he did not force them to follow him, but said to them, 'A prince and a general, I would rather have a seat.' How innocent are the common people! If not helpless, who would be willing to die for such an emperor?" Wu King Ai and others had missed the military plane at that time, and they were punished according to the military law. Even if they returned home, they would be deserters. But in the end what he did was rebellion. Wu King Ai did not dare to communicate with his family, and only waited for the situation to stabilize before bringing his family to his side. I didn't expect this to be 5 or 6 years. Wu King Ai has made many achievements in these years, and he has won the appreciation of King Yi, and he has been promoted from an ordinary soldier to the position of general. At this time, he really wanted to take his family by his side, and it happened that a major event happened around Yuang. The child he raised in the countryside was lost. In fact, it is not just lost now, but it has been lost for several years. But King Yi, like Wu King Ai, came from a humble background. Before he made his fortune, he was just a small corporal. After the uprising, he placed his family in a remote place to hide their names, and only dared to return home every few years, lest they would be implicated. It wasn't until half a year ago that the rebels were winning, and the righteous king went back to pick up the family in person, and only then did he know that his son was lost. The righteous king Kiji was honored, and he was not attracted to women when he marched outside, and he seldom returned home to reunite with his wife. The child was his only seed, and he naturally attached great importance to it. Wu King Ai was instructed to look for it, but although they were all elites, it had been many years since the incident, and they were looking for a young child, so they only had a rough range, and they found all the way to the vicinity of their hometown. He originally made up his mind to pick up his family this time, but he didn't expect torrential rain and the river bank burst, another tragic disaster. He was deeply saddened, but years of self-control worked in this moment. Now that his family is gone, he should help the righteous king who has been kind to him find his son, so that he can avoid the pain he is suffering now. After receiving his order, the group turned over and mounted. At this time, in Hanshan town, hundreds of miles away, Wang Shi was talking to Gu Yin, but suddenly sneezed more than a dozen times in a row, scolding, "I don't know which one the turtle son talks about the old lady." Immediately, she thought of her man and son, as well as those old acquaintances in Bata village. Except for Gu Yin and Xiao Wen in front of her, where else would anyone remember her? After they came out of Bata village that day, it rained heavily for several days. It was not convenient for their orphans, widows and mothers to travel at night. Stopped, just halfway through the trip, I heard about the disaster in Bata village. This time, I didn't dare to stop, I accelerated my pace, and finally arrived at Hanshan town a day ago. On the way here, Guyan asked Wang's future plans. Wang was reluctant to say more, but when she arrived in Hanshan town, she had to tell her some things. Wang's heart was deeply moved, and then she told Guyan about the past. It turned out that Wang's family was considered a wealthy family in the town. Don't look at Wang's current situation, she was also a young lady from a small rich family back then. The second elder of the Wang family gave birth to 2 sons, and only got a daughter in his later years. He raised her like a jewel, and regarded her as more important than the eyeball. Until Wang was 15 years old, the 2 elders were not willing to marry this precious daughter. That year, Wang met his father Wu, who came to make a living in another place. Dad Wu was a very handsome young man. After his parents were gone, he came to Hanshan town to do business with his fellow villagers. Because of limited capital, what we do is a pair of poles and 2 small cages. Wang was at the age when he liked fresh gadgets, and the 2 of them knew each other from time to time. After a lot of contact, Wang even took the initiative to express her intentions. Dad Wu was flattered and felt that he was not worthy of her, so he rejected her at the beginning. But Wang was stubborn and stubbornly said that if Wu Daddy didn't want her, she would shave her hair and be a sister-in-law. Wu Daddy was very pleased with her, and when he heard that the girl he liked was like this as said, naturally they no longer escape, and the 2 settled on this. Wang's temperament is very small, and after falling in love, he told his family that he would not marry. This makes the second Wang family angry. It's not that they are stubborn, the town has a simple atmosphere, and the families who live near know the bottom line. It's a foreigner in sight. But Wang was determined, and she threatened her with hunger strike if the family did not let her go. The parents of the Wang family were also distressed for their daughter, and finally came up with a compromise solution to let Father Wu join the Wang family. He was alone and widowed, wouldn't it be just right to join the royal family? In this way, Wang's wish was fulfilled, and they could keep their daughter by their side for a long time. But Father Wu is not willing. It's not that he doesn't like the Wang family enough, but that after joining the family, he gave up his surname and became the Wang family. In the early years, their Wu family was not prosperous. The court levied heavy taxes. In order to continue their own incense, their parents saved food for him to eat. It can be said that his parents starved to death for him. How could he give up his surname and cut off his inheritance? The matter stalemate later, Wang made another hang. That time, the parents of the Wang family were really heartbroken. They immediately kicked her out of the house and told her not to come back to Hanshan town again. Wang married into the Wu family just like that, and the later fields of the Wu family were replaced by her jewelry at that time. Wu's father is practical and hard-working, and Wang's also learns to be the master of the house. The days after marriage can be described as harmonious and beautiful. But the Wang family has no face to go back to her parents' home, so she can only have people bring home letters and small gifts back every once in a while. After 2 years, the Wang family's parents lost their anger, and just as the Wang family gave birth to their eldest son, they sent a letter saying that when their eldest grandson was a little older, he would return to Hanshan town to see him. When Wu Qing'ai was half a year old, Mrs. Wang rushed back to her parents' home with her husband and son, but was shocked to hear the sad news of the passing away of both the old and the old. There were 2 older brothers on top of the Wang family. At that time, they were having a lot of trouble over the family property. When they saw this farm-married sister coming back, they thought she was also here to mix and split the family. Naturally, it was not good. Face. A lot of ugly words were said, and the Wang family was also arrogant. After the parents' funeral was finished, she left with her husband and son, and never communicated with her parents' family again. The most recent correspondence between Wang's family and her maiden family was probably when the imperial court forced a strong man 5 years ago. A strong man is worth 12 taels, and it costs 22 taels of silver to keep people. Mrs. Wang didn't expect her mother's brother and sister-in-law to be so generous to give out all 20 taels for her family. Anyway, leave a man at home. However, she never responded to the message she sent back to her mother's house, and finally let it go. The Wang family is really annoyed now. If it wasn't for the previous incident, she might never return to Hanshan town in her life. Of course, these old things are not glorious, and even a little deviant. She has never even mentioned one of her own two sons, let alone tell Guyin's daughter-in-law. But she thought about dealing with her family in the future. Instead of letting the two worry-free sisters-in-law make it up to them, it would be better for him to tell it honestly. It's also a shame that Mrs. Wang got through it early, because just after she finished talking about these things, two sister-in-laws of her parents' family came to look for her. At that time, Mrs. Wang had finished talking to Guyin. Seeing that she had no words for a long time, she said, "Why, don't you believe me?" "No." Guyin replied. "They have all returned to the realm of Wang's family, and there is absolutely no need for Wang to lie to her." And in retrospect, in the original memory, although Wang was a peasant woman, she was not as careless as other villagers. She works quickly, keeping the house spotless, trimming her nails and rinsing her mouth every day, and changing her personal clothes. Even if she doesn't have decent clothes and jewelry, she has black hair that is neat and tidy. It is very clean and refreshing, and it also makes the hygiene habits of the entire warrior family very good. It's also right on the background, she said. It's just that Guyin didn't expect Wang Shi to have the style of a modern woman when she was young, dare to love freely and challenge dogma and stereotype. At the same time, this incident also reminded Guyin that Wang's temperament, who dared to go against her parents when she was young, was really stubborn, and even 8 horses couldn't pull it back. Guyin has a preliminary plan for the future. Of course, she still eats by craftsmanship. It's just that no matter how small a transaction is, it needs capital. Although the original Guyin is also 19 and almost 20 years old, she has no money for a private house. It is indeed difficult for Wang to follow the advice of his daughter-in-law and provide some capital. At this time, the wife of the Tubidrum Wang family came. Speaking of which, Wang has not seen two sisters-in-law in 20 years. The eldest of her 2 brothers is already old, and the youngest is past the age of knowing destiny. The 2 sisters-in-law were about the same age as their own man, so naturally they were no longer young. The eldest sister-in-law of the Wang family, Mrs. Zhao, has a face shape and a slender figure, looking a little dull. The second sister-in-law, Mrs. Zhou, is short and chubby, with a round face and round eyes. Both of them were grandmother's age, with ravines on their faces and white hair on their heads. Wang hadn't recognized them at first sight. But when Zhao and Zhou saw Wang, they took her one hand from left to right, and wiped her eyes with a handkerchief excitedly. "Last night we heard that we met someone very much like you at the gate of the city, and we didn't believe it. After thinking about it for a night, we still couldn't rest assured, so we inquired about the news. Come and take a look. I didn't realize it was really you." The second sister-in-law, Mrs. Zhou, spoke first, her eyes turning red as she spoke. Sister-in-law Zhao Shi was a little stupid, but she was also excited. "It's good to be back, it's good to be back." In fact, Mrs. Wang had some estrangement with these 2 sisters-in-law. After all, the separation of the family and the matter of borrowing 2 taels of silver later made her feel very uncomfortable. "But I haven't seen each other for many years, and both sisters-in-law have grown so old that they burst into tears when they saw her." Thinking of the fact that they were once a family, Wang's heart softened. Before she could speak, Mrs. Zhou took the initiative to talk about what happened back then, and said, "My little sister hasn't come back for many years. I don't know, the family life has been bad these years. Back then, my parents suddenly walked back and forth. Yes, it cost a lot of money to treat the funeral. You 2 brothers, as you know, are not good at business, but they lost their fortune in a few years. Later, the brothers of our 2 families went to the school, and every year the beam repaired it will cost a lot of money. Besides, the court recruited strong men 5 years ago. As she spoke, Mrs. Zhou also showed a fortunately ashamed look on her face. At that time, your nephews and nieces will all bloom, and no one will bear their children. After spending a lot of money to clear up the relationship, I finally left a few children. When I received your letter, I really didn't have any money left. Zhao also quickly echoed, yes, at that time, I went back to my mother's house overnight to withdraw the money, thinking of getting through the difficulties for my sister's family. Seeing that the days of conscription have passed, I will never see you again. These two sister-in-law, you explained what happened in the past, one by one, and Wang Shi thought about it for a while. Before she got married, the eldest sister-in-law gave birth to 2 children, and the second sister-in-law gave birth to 2 children. 3, and by the time of the conscription, the next generation of nephews and nieces will also grow up. She doesn't want her husband and son to enlist in the army, and they naturally won't be willing to give up their children. Wang looked at the clothes of her 2 sisters-in-law. They are all grey old clothes, there is no decoration on the hands and head, and the expression is also sad, and the tears have disappeared since they met. Cut off. Is it really a misunderstanding? Not waiting for Wang to think about it, Zhou's eyes fell on Guyin, and she said with admiration, what a handsome little lady. Is this your King Ai's daughter-in-law? Wang's face showed a slight smile, and said, second sister-in-law guessed right. She is the daughter-in-law of my family's eldest son, and my half-daughter. She has been raised by her side since she was a child. Zhou and Zhao looked at each other, and they both understood that Guyin was the child bride of the Wu family. Both of them praised Guyin, and then Wang introduced Xiao Wuan to them and asked him to call someone, and naturally they got another pass. After the emotions calmed down, Mrs. Zhao and Mrs. Zhou sat down with Mrs. Wang to talk. My sister-in-law asked what was the matter of Mrs. Wang's return home. Although Mrs. Wang was in ups and downs at this time, she still knew what to say and what not to say, so she didn't mention Li Daniu. It was said that the hometown was hit by a flood, and the 3 escaped by luck. Zhao and Zhou wiped their eyes again with a handkerchief, and cried out that they were distressed. Afterwards, Mrs. Zhao added, it is reasonable to say that you have escaped hardships, we should have entertained them. But they are not outsiders, and the plight of the family is not hidden from you. Good luck. The neighboring Yuanshan County is recruiting female workers here, not only providing accommodation and meals, but also paying $6 a month. My sister and your King Ai daughter-in-law are smart people, and they will definitely be selected. Zhou also took out a small silver bracelet wrapped in a coarse cloth handkerchief from her bosom, and said, Yuanshan County is 5 or 6 days' journey away from us. This is for my sister. Zhou's father is an old scholar, he failed the exam all his life, and his family was so poor that he had no last meal. When the Zhou family got married, the family only gave such a fine silver bracelet as a dowry. Wang was impressed by this bracelet, and felt more and more uncomfortable. Where would she accept her dowry? I haven't been willing to my beloved things for many years. If my sister doesn't accept it, she still hates us because of what happened back then. The Wang family had to accept it. Afterwards, Mrs. Zhao and Mrs. Zhou also said that Mrs. Wang had not returned for many years and was not familiar with the affairs of the town. Wang Shi looked at them being old and frail but still willing to accompany him on the run, and the last trace of resentment in his heart was suppressed. The kindness is difficult to accept, Wang Shi was about to agree, but Guyin suddenly coughed at this time. She frowned, she was out of breath, and her already pale face became worse. Xiao Wuan hurriedly poured water for her. Wang slapped her forehead and said, look at my brain. I just heard what my sister-in-law said, but I just thought about earning money and forgot that my daughter-in-law was seriously ill. The bed is moving, but the workmanship is probably not enough. There was a brief pause in the smiles on the faces of Mrs. Zhao and Mrs. Zhou, but soon Mrs. Zhou said, what a poor child. Sister, don't blame the sister-in-law for being so talkative, you need more for this child. Go to the county seat. The doctor there is good, and the medicinal materials are complete, which is not comparable in our small town. Don't let the children drag along and leave the root of the disease. Wang Shi seriously thought about it, nodded and said, second sister-in-law is indeed reasonable, but we have already hurried for a month, and I can't bear to let her run around again. Let her rest for a few days. Zhao had to say something more, but was stopped by Zhou's wink. The two of them didn't stay any longer, they said to let Guyan have a good rest, and they would come to visit tomorrow. Wang sent the two away, and when she came back, Guyan had stopped coughing. She glared at Guyan and complained, on the way here, I kept saying that I was all right, how are you? If it weren't for your papery body, I would have already gone to recruit workers. The place is registered. It's a good job to pay for food, housing, and monthly payment, and I know that if you are one step later, you won't have a chance. However, despite the scolding, Mrs. Wang still took out an old purse containing all the money from her close-fitting clothes, and was going to go to the street to ask a doctor to prescribe medicine for her. What can Guyan do? He could only look at her helplessly. If she hadn't deliberately coughed and interrupted them, this stupid mother-in-law would have been sold. Guyan would make such a judgment, of course it makes sense. First of all, Mrs. Zhao and Mrs. Zhou kept saying that they were in a bad situation these years and they wore simple clothes, but they didn't have any calluses on their hands. Also tender. Of course, it may also be the filial piety of the younger generation in the family. But when Mrs. Wang invited them to sit down, Mrs. Zhao and Mrs. Zhou quickly took out a handkerchief and wiped the ashes-free stool, while the other frowned slightly and pursed the corners of his mouth, not very much. Willingly sit down. Then Wang poured water for them in a large porcelain bowl, and neither of them touched a mouthful. Guyan and the others now live in the lower class room of the inn, with only a large bed and a table and chairs. The tables and chairs are too old to see their original color. But Mrs. Wang is a person who can't see dirt. On the day she came, she cleaned and scrubbed the inside and outside of the house. Will people who have lived in poverty for half their lives be as particular as they are? Also, ordinary people shed tears first, and then wipe their eyes with a handkerchief. This pair of sister-in-law is very good, first wipe the eyes with a handkerchief, and then there are tears. When Guyan stepped forward to salute them, she smelled a faintly spicy scent. The tears were mostly forced out with a veil soaked in juice. Finally, listen to what they have to say. They really want to care about Wang, as they say. That's what it's been like over the years. How can I not ask about the situation of the Wang family, and just keep saying that my family is not doing well? Listening to the inside and outside of the words, is to take the Wang who just returned to Hanshan town for a day. What about going further afield? Based on the above analysis, Guyan felt that these two were cheating. Guyan pondered for a while, then asked, before my grandfather passed away, did you leave anything for your mother? Wang was still counting the copper coins in the purse, and when he heard the words, he replied, didn't I tell you, when I wanted to marry your father, they were all mad. My mother at that time, they prepared a lot of dowry furniture for me, and I asked my father to take an axe and chop it up. Later, they died unexpectedly, and they left without leaving a word. Her eyes darkened when she said that. At that time, the second old man was all about watching King Ai, and the letter that came in said that the rooms that the family had promised me had been cleaned all the time, and they went back and lived there for the first half of the year. The house at home. Guyan extracted some clues from her words. Yet, my family used to be wealthy, and your grandfather bought a second-class yard, but the family is not very populated, and many rooms are empty. North, but it's very spacious, with 2 bungalows and a small patio. Is it already sold? But it's normal, living is a problem, there's no need to live in such a good house. Okay, let's go, I'm going to invite a doctor, I don't know if this amount of silver is enough. Wang touched the silver bracelet that Zhou had put on himself, thinking that if it was not enough, I can only this bracelet, but I don't know how much money I can pawn. I feel better now, maybe I was excited when I saw the relatives of my grandfather's family. Wang shook his head and insisted, I'd better ask a doctor to take a look, and the old doctor at the beginning also said that your high fever was dangerous and dragged on for so long. After that, I have to take some tonics to keep it warm for half a year to ensure that the root of the disease is not left. In short, it is better to be safe. Guyan couldn't persuade her, so she said that she could at least move around now, so she might as well go directly to the medical center, which also saved the cost of bringing the doctor back. Mrs. Wang nodded, and the three of them left the inn together. On the street, Mr. Wang sighed again, saying that he would never get lost if he closed his eyes in the town, but now he really doesn't know it. He knew it earlier. You don't have to travel such a long way to come back here, just find a place closer to Bata village and settle down. Then they asked to find a hospital. Wang Shi glanced at Guyan, her eyes full of look, your mother is still your mother, what could be wrong? When it was time to prescribe the medicine, Mrs. Wang realized that the price of the medicine was doubled. Because there was a flood in Bata village, although Hanshan town was far away, it was not affected, but the transportation road was affected. Wang was so distressed, but she still paid Guyan to get medicine for 3 days. After getting the medicine, Guyan proposed to find someone to inquire about the recruitment of workers in Yuanshan County. Wang is also worried about money. Although he knows that such a good opportunity will not wait for others, he will not lose anything if he asks. If he is still recruiting people, Guyan can't do the work, she does it alone, anyway, $5 or $6 a month is enough to support the family. They chatted with the shopkeeper of the pharmacy and learned that the recruiter was a boat company in Yuanshan County, but the workplace was not in Yuanshan County, but it was going to sea with the boat, at least come back in 2 or 3 years. It is precisely because you have to leave your hometown that the treatment is so good. People in this era are still very obsessed with their hometown, let alone leave the land to go to sea to seek a life. In addition, women who go out for several years do not conform to the dogma and rules, so people who value rules and reputation will naturally not do this work. In this chaotic world, there are a lot of people who can't survive, so there are indeed many people who sign up. Wang frowned. She doesn't care about her reputation, but going to sea to seek a life sounds really dangerous, let alone what to do if you are not used to getting sick outside. Even if there is a doctor on board, but the person is overseas, can the medicinal materials be complete? Carefully give birth to a patient. And Wuan is only over 5 years old, so it is extremely unsafe for such a young child to stay here alone or go out to sea with him. Wang Shi frowned, let alone Guyan. It is indeed normal for a boat to go to sea to accompany people, but what does it mean to recruit female workers? Women are naturally weak, and they are not as useful as men. Unless... She asked people again with a dignified expression, and after she knew that the ship was opened by the godson of the court and the formalities were complete, she did not ask any further. This world really wants to eat people. After leaving the pharmacy, Guyan proposed, Mother, although the work introduced by the ants is not reliable. But since we have all come out, we should visit the uncle's house. Wang was still recalling the 2 sister-in-laws who encouraged her to become a female worker, and when she heard the words, she responded, they are doing such a bad time, we have to spend money to entertain us when we go there rashly. And we didn't say that we would come to the door when the 2 sisters-in-law came before, and we had to trouble them to prepare now if we went so rashly. What Guyan wanted was just such a risky. It doesn't matter, but Wuan and I are juniors. If we don't go to see the ceremony, we will not have enough courtesy. Besides, I am also curious about what your other relatives are like, and want to see if they are as good as you. Wang was smoothed out by her words. Although it was strange that her daughter-in-law suddenly talked about etiquette, she still reluctantly bought half a caddy of ugly oranges and half a caddy of pears on the street, then let's just sit and talk for a while, not eat there. Afterwards, Wang Shi asked passers-by and took them there according to the location of the old house in memory. After half an hour, the three of Guyan finally arrived at the Wang family's old house. The Wang family didn't lie, the Wang family was an impressive family in Hanshan town. However, it has really fallen into disrepair over the years. Muttering, "This house is probably sold to others, I don't know if I can find out their new residents," and knocked on the door. After a while, an old housekeeper responded slowly, and when he saw her, he was pleasantly surprised. "Mrs. back." Mrs. Wang was overjoyed when she saw it, and said, "Uncle Zhong." Uncle Zhong cheerfully responded, and quickly opened the door and invited them in. At this time, in the Wang family's house, Mrs. Zhao and Mrs. Zhou were sitting and talking together. Zhao looked at Zhou with some resentment and said, "Why didn't my brother and sister let me persuade her to apply for the application? Once the contract is signed, we don't have to care about her. But her daughter-in-law is ill, let's talk more," but it's about to reveal the truth. What can she reveal? She hasn't come back for so many years and has been a peasant woman for half her life. What can she know? Everyone is saying that it is a good job for the ocean-going shipping line to recruit female workers, but the Wang family is better informed than the average person, knowing that the ocean-going shipping line has recruited people in other places a few years earlier, and the result is that those female workers go or not return, live without people, die without corpses. Later, the families of the female workers started making trouble, but the ocean-going shipping line only said that there was a plague outside, so they didn't even dare to bring the corpse back. Then they were paying a sum of money, and they were endorsed by the powerful eunuchs. They put all the troublemakers in jail, and the matter was over. Because of this incident, ocean-going shipping lines are notorious in large places like the capital, so they had to go to small places like Yuanshan County and Hanshan Town to recruit people. "Sister-in-law, don't be in a hurry," Mrs. Zhou picked up the teacup and slowly dipped the foam with the tea lid. "Let us men go together later, just because I heard that his daughter-in-law is not healthy. It was a special visit to take care of." The Zhao family also thinks about it, and the words of a sister-in-law are naturally not as useful as a real brother. At this time, Uncle Zhong's excited voice came from outside. The old man was really happy, shouting, "Your honored guest!" while trotting. Why did this old lunatic come out again? Mr. Zhou put down the teacup heavily, frowning in displeasure. Uncle Zhong was an old servant of the Wang family, and he followed the old man of the Wang family when he was a child. Since the second old man passed away, this old servant has lost his mind and cannot listen to others. The two families wanted to drive him away, but the elders in the helpless clan all remembered him, so it was not easy to do such a heartless thing, and only drove him to the firewood house. "Come, give some cold meals and cold dishes, and keep it as a watchdog." Yesterday I heard that Mrs. Wang was back. Mrs. Zhou had already explained to the concierge that if a stranger came to look for him, he would say that the owner had changed, but he didn't expect this old lunatic to run out again. "I don't know who is coming." While talking, Mrs. Zhao and Mrs. Zhou went out of the house, and the rest of the family also came out when they heard the noise. After a while, everyone arrived at the gate. The two families are 3 generations in the same house, and there are 20 or 30 people in total. At first, Wang Shi couldn't help laughing when she saw Uncle Zhong's happiness, but when she saw the clothes of the 20 or 30 people, she couldn't laugh. The Zhao family and the Zhou family at the beginning were still wearing old clothes that were grey in the morning, while the other younger daughters-in-law in the family were all silk and satin. A set of red gold head and face, a thumb-sized gold and jade bracelet on the wrist. This is what her 2 old sisters-in-law said about the house where she couldn't open the pot and couldn't eat. Wang clenched his back molars angrily. The scene was awkward. "I don't see the happy face when I first met, like the headmistress of a big family." Wang was very angry, and angrily poured beans into a bamboo tube and shouted, "Is this the home that my sister-in-law said can't be opened? I said, why did my parents leave so much family business? How did I get to my brother, sister-in-law and sister-in-law? Suddenly I couldn't do it, and I didn't say to let me go home. How dare I lie to me as an idiot? I also wanted to tell me to go to Yuanshan County to apply for a female worker. Those who go to sea with the boat, such a dangerous work is hyped by what you said, you are killing my life. All the wives didn't know what happened. When the eldest of their middle grades came in, Mrs. Wang was no longer at home. Especially in the early morning when Zhao and Zhou disguised themselves to deceive Wang, it was even more disgraceful, and they did not mention a word to their daughter-in-law. Zhou did not expect Wang to come so soon, nor did he expect Wang Zhong, the madman, to run out and put people in. But in front of all the daughters-in-law, she naturally couldn't show her timidity, and immediately retorted, "Sister-in-law is really wrong. My sister-in-law and I went to look for you early in the morning, and we were all concerned. The heart of the world can be seen. Since it is a reunion of relatives, it is necessary to reminisce. Are people like us not allowed to have some unspeakable suffering? We told you what we said in our hearts, why did we deceive you as a fool? Let's talk about us. Why didn't you let you go home? It was your King Ai daughter-in-law who suddenly felt uncomfortable. We just wanted to let her rest." In the end, the ocean-going shipping line was a serious merchant, and the recruitment procedures were complete and the treatment was generous, I thought. The girl is a strong person, and she definitely doesn't want to do things that beat the autumn wind, so I kindly recommend you to go. How can it end up killing you? Wang clenched her fists angrily. Second sister-in-law is so eloquent, I can't talk about you. I won't say anything about you, just say whether you kept saying that life at home was difficult this morning, what should you do? The business was in short supply, my brother went to school to get rid of repairs, and he gave me such a bracelet, saying that there was nothing better at home. As she spoke, she took off the silver bracelet on her wrist and brought it to Mrs. Zhou. Blame me, I only think that this is my dowry, and it is my most precious thing. Zhou pretended to wipe away tears. It turns out that the little sister thinks that the valuable is the good thing. Zhou is worthy of being the old daughter of a scholar's family. She speaks in a well-balanced manner. In the eyes of money, all he wants is to take advantage of the autumn wind. Seeing her wipe away her tears, Zhou's daughter-in-law hurried forward to persuade her. Because the Wang family is also their elder, they are not easy to talk about, one said. You are also excited when you meet your relatives, so you told your heart, it's not what your aunt said. Poverty. The other said, my mother-in-law took out her dowry, she was really kind, but unfortunately my aunt didn't understand. Wang has long known that her second sister-in-law is eloquent and has been studying for a few days. The world changes over time, and the same mouth says something completely different. After some reversal of black and white, Wang's angry words are about to fail. It's just that she's in her parents' house right now, so some juniors are watching. Seeing that Mrs. Wang was getting angry, Guyan stepped forward to hold her arm and said, Mother, don't be angry. This is a misunderstanding, I don't think the two aunts are not people like that. Wang, she didn't expect her to speak, and she didn't expect her to speak to the other party as soon as she spoke. She glared at Guyan, and was about to tell her not to interfere with the adults, but she felt Guyan squeezed her hand under her sleeve. The two of them cooperated and subdued the thief not long ago, so Mr. Wang thought that Guyan was prepared. But her own child knows that although her daughter-in-law has become calm and smart after being ill, but she has been stupid since she was a child, and she doesn't like to say a word, and 8 sticks can't make a fart. Can she speak to the Zhou family who came from a scholar family? And Zhou's two daughters-in-law didn't seem to be easy to get along with. On the Wang family's side, the Zhou family had been persuaded by her daughter-in-law to stop crying, and when she heard Guyan's words, the corner of her mouth brought a sneering smile. Look! A countryman is a countryman, this little daughter-in-law was fooled by her words and turned her elbows out. A pair of idiots. Zhou made a kind smile, I have long said that you are a smart and transparent child, please persuade your mother. Guyan also smiled back, and then said calmly, I also heard what the two aunts said earlier, and it sounds like the family is really difficult. I can't open the pot, but combined with the dress of the two aunts, I don't blame my mother for misunderstanding. As soon as she said this, the rest of the Wang family noticed that the two old ladies were indeed overdressed today. The head and face of the jewelry are all clean, and the clothes on the body are similar to those worn by the mother-in-law at home. Zhao's daughter-in-law's eyes looked at Zhao's eyes and it was uncomfortable. Although she was not as good as Zhou's ability to reverse black and white, she still knew that she had to follow Zhou's words and said, "We are going to see my sister, not an outsider. Is it necessary to dress up specially?" Zhou said, "Yes, my sister-in-law and I know that your situation is not good. If we still wear gold and silver, wouldn't it be a show of prestige?" The two of them sang together, and they were still unbeatable. Guyan was still not in a hurry, and said unhurriedly, "Yes, the two aunts are right. But my mother doesn't know, she came to see, the sister-in-law's clothes are rich human eyes, don't you think that the two aunts are specially pretending to be poor and crying poor? But I think it must not be that you are crying poor on purpose, it must be a person with a bad conscience to lie to the relatives who have no choice but to return home after the disaster? Surely it's a misunderstanding." Wang grinned and wanted to laugh, but held it back. She just nodded and said suddenly, "It turns out that the two sisters-in-law are dressed like that, and they said that for my sake. I really think of them. You've lost your conscience. But it's strange to say that their daughters-in-law are dressed so richly, with red faces, and they look at each other's life and nourishment. How can they live so badly when they are mothers-in-law?" Guyan pondered for a long time, lowered her voice, but also ensured that everyone present could hear, what the two aunts want to say is not a lie, that is, they have lived a bright life these years. The inner hard work. The daughters-in-law enjoy the blessings, and the hardships are left to them. As she spoke, Guyan sighed and said sadly, "Mother, although our family is poor, the best thing in our family must be close to you, Wuan and I are filial to you, and we will never let you live such a bad life with a bright surface and a rotten inside. I can't imagine that there are people in the world who don't pay attention to filial piety. I feel really uncomfortable." Wang smirked until her face was twitching. The Zhao family and the Zhou family changed their faces at the same time. They never thought that the little farmer's daughter-in-law would open her mouth and make up these words, "To be a big hat button with a conscience and no filial piety, it's almost breathless to come down." Especially both of them have children who are studying, and they all know that reputation is the most important thing. If you let this word spread, let alone future scientific examinations, it would really be everyone who wants to do it. King Ai's daughter-in-law is going to talk nonsense. Zhou was shocked and angry, but Guyan's words followed her previous words, and she couldn't think of how to refute it for a while. "Cousin, this is a misunderstanding," one of Zhou's daughters-in-law said with a smile. "Mother and auntie are setting an example for the younger generation in the family, and teaching the children to remember their hardships. Sweet. Although our juniors have no ability to let my in-laws live a rich life, how can we not treat them harshly? Zhou is so eloquent, the daughter-in-law she chose is naturally the same as her." Guyan didn't argue with her either, she just nodded as if suddenly realized, "That's it. I think it's wrong, so I'll just say, the Wang family is my mother's family, my wife is like this. Well, the atmosphere at home is definitely better, and there will never be such a conscienceless person." Said that she was blessed again, and said apologetically, "I was young and stupid, and I grew up in the countryside and had never seen the big world, so I was anxious to explain the misunderstanding to my two aunts, and I was confused for a while. Made my aunt and sister-in-law laugh." However, the Zhao family and the Zhou family didn't want to let the juniors watch the fun, so they waved their hands and let them all go down. When everyone dispersed, Zhao and Zhou invited Guyan to the hall. Without outsiders, Mr. Zhou did not go around in circles, and directly issued an expulsion order with a cold face, saying, "Your brother is not at home, the children are studying outside, working, and there is nothing at home. Treat yourself with good things. We won't keep any more girls. Who wants you to entertain?" Wang sneered, "Why can't I stay longer when I go back to my own house?" As she spoke, she took out the family letter that the second old man wrote to him. The paper of the home letter has turned yellow, but the handwriting is still clearly visible. It clearly stated that the big house on the north side of the mansion was left to Wang by the second elders so that she could come back to live at any time in the future. The Zhao family and the Zhou family changed their faces. Although Mr. Wang is a merchant, he loves calligraphy and ink, and it is difficult to cheat. Zhao Shi didn't know how to deal with it, so he just looked at Zhou Shi with his eyes. Zhou pondered for a while and said, "How can we women understand this? It's better to wait for your brothers and nephews to come back later and let them see it." The Wang family suffered a loss in the fight against Jai Feng before, and did not talk to them, only said, "Then I will go back to pack my luggage first, and then I will move here first. The second brother is back, it's up to them to decide." Without waiting for them to answer, Mrs. Wang stuffed the family letter into her clothes, picked up the pears and ugly oranges she brought, and called Guyan and Xiao Wuan out of the Wang family. When she came out to the street, Mrs. Wang didn't care about anything, and scolded, "I believe these two uneasy and kind old women, crying and crying. His mother almost died. Their way." Guyan gave her words of consolation. Mother was also excited when she saw her relatives, and she was concealed by them when she didn't notice. Although it is a word of comfort, it is also Guyan's true thoughts. Although Wang is an ancient woman born and raised in the countryside, and has spent most of her life in the countryside, she is quick to respond, not stupid, and has some wisdom in life. Just like when the refugee first began, Guyan felt that she was carrying too many things. But on the way, she realized that these things are very necessary, and thanks to Wang's things, they spent a lot of money along the way, and they can be self-sufficient when they are in the deserted villages. Today's incident is the first and only time that Wang has been deceived after Guyan crossed over. But it's easy to understand, she is always cold-hearted, and attaches great importance to her family. How can she think that a family member she hasn't seen for many years will come up with a full set of hypocritical singing and playing? Thanks to you too. Wang Shi's eyes dodged a little as he spoke. It was all Guyan who took care of her so as not to make the trouble even more ugly. What a shame! Guyan tilted her head in confusion. What did you say? Isn't this what you taught me over the years? After saying this, Mrs. Wang thinks it's right again. When she bought it back, she didn't know anything and didn't know how to work. Isn't it all her credit for being so smart now? The last three returned to the inn to pack their luggage. Guyan asked about Wang's future plans again. She had asked this many times in secret, but Wang had always told her not to ask more about adults. After what happened today, she finally changed her tone, and turned to talk to her carefully. That house was left to me by your grandfather, and the handwritten letters cannot be faked, although they said to wait for my two old brothers to come back to make a decision, but because he invited the King of Heaven, what should be mine is mine, so we can live with peace of mind. After you live here, you can take care of your illness, and I will go outside as before. Starch and wash clothes. Although we earn less, we don't need to rent another house as before, and we can always get by. Wang's plan was not wrong, but Guyan thought that the Wang family might not let them live so easily. She hesitated for a while, and said, "Mother, I don't know what to say." Inappropriate to speak. Wang rolled her eyes. What else should we talk about? Let the farts go. Don't hide and tuck like my second sister-in-law. Guyan attached herself to Wang Shi's ear and talked in detail. That evening, brothers Wang Deifu and Wang Degi came back from outside with their sons. The Zhao family and the Zhou family were waiting early in the morning, and they went out to meet them as soon as the next person passed the message. Wang Deifu was intercepted on the way to the party, so he was very angry, and when he entered the house, he asked Zhao Shi in a bad tone, "What's the big deal? Let us rush back in a panic." The Zhao family has always been afraid of her, this old man, so she didn't dare to speak after a meal. It was when the two families worked together, and Mrs. Zhou helped to smooth things out, "Uncle, don't be annoyed, it's the little sister who came to the house today." Several people entered the hall while talking, and the servants were all screened out. Wang Deifu blew his beard and stared. "I got the news last night, you said there was a way to send her away. This is your way? Bring everyone home." Zhao Shi lowered her head after being scolded by her, but Zhou Shi's face didn't show anything. In fact, fire had risen in her heart. Since the second elder is gone, their first and second rooms have actually been separated. However, a good house like the Wang family old mansion is hard to find in Hanshan town, so although the property is divided, neither of the two families is willing to live in this house, so they still live in one place. It's not a family anymore. Is it his turn, Wang Deifu, to question her? But Mrs. Zhou is still a calm person. She explained the ins and outs of the matter unhurriedly. Wang Deifu was calm at first, but when he heard that Wang had 2 old letters in his hands, he stood up and asked, "Where's the book?" In addition to that room, it also wrote what? Zhou shook her head. She only showed 1 page of paper, and she just gave us a look and put it away. It's really impossible to know what was written next to it. Wang Deifu hurriedly circled the room. Wang Degi, who has been silent all the time, said slowly, "Could we not know the character of our sister? She was almost concealed by us. It's here. I read that book, I'm afraid it only wrote about the house." Wang Degi and Zhou's husband and wife from the second room are the same people. Hearing what he said, Wang Deifu finally calmed down, but still anxiously said, "What do you mean by that, little girl? You want to stay at our house?" Zhou nodded. She didn't make a statement at the time, but turned around and went to pack up with her cunning daughter-in-law. "It seems that most of them are going to stay. We must not let them stay in Hanshan town, let alone in our house." Wang Deifu patted the table. "Second daughter-in-law, think of a way." Wang holds the handwritten letter of Mr. Wang in his hand. Zhou really did not expect things to develop to this stage, and there is no way to do it for a while. "Brother, don't worry, it's just a room. Now they live in our house, and when the night is quiet, they will send someone to steal the letter from the family and destroy it. Then they say no evidence, let's just ignore it." Wang Degi said with a smile, "We'll drive them out of the house later. The soldiers are in chaos outside, and the little sister and the others are orphans and widows. If the hooligans are bullied, it's none of our business. This is not good." Wang Deifu hesitated. After all, he is a compatriot, and he will not be able to achieve such a feat. Wang Degi and Zhou looked at each other. Both of them showed contempt for the benevolence of Wang Deifu's wife. "That's another story," Wang Degi said. "Anyway, let's destroy the letter first. If the little girl is interested, let's send some money and let them go to other places to seek life." Several people were discussing, and the concierge came to tell me that Mr. Wang had come again. "This girl is really a ghost reincarnated, she won't let people breathe at all." Zhou was also a little impatient, but she still got the guests in. Not long after, a group of 4 or 5 elderly people came in tremblingly with crutches. Now Wang Deifu and the others couldn't sit still and stood up to salute. "Why did the uncles suddenly come? Don't say hello, so that we can meet them in person." Wang poked a face from behind the leading old man. "Of course I invited it." Wang Deifu laughed dryly. "Your second brother and I just came back from outside and heard that my younger sister is back, and we were just trying to talk to you. Why did you suddenly go and kill several uncles? Please come." Wang Shi was disgusted when he saw his smiling face, and also smirked. "The first brother, the second brother, did not know that I was back? I thought it was last night. The letter I got with the 2 old sisters-in-law." Wang Deifu was embarrassed by her words. Naturally, their brothers got the news last night, but they were not sure, and secondly, they felt that Wang had been a peasant woman for many years and had not returned for many years. "Come forward with Mr. Zhou." Wang has known the character and habits of the 2 older brothers since they were young, and by looking at their unnatural faces, he knew that the 2 were lying. The uncles came here today too. The old man headed by him is the cousin of Mr. Wang and the patriarch of the current clan. The patriarch did not go around in circles with them, and said, "It was Baiyun who said she had letters from your parents before they went, and invited us to come over for appraisal." Baiyun is naturally Wang's name. The faces of the brothers and sisters of the Wang family became embarrassed. Just now, they were planning to destroy the letters in the hands of the Wang family. This time it's good, after several uncles have made such an appraisal, their so-called plan has become a fantasy. Wang Deifu and Wang Degi couldn't help thinking at the same time, it's no wonder that their old wife failed to fool the little girl, who would have thought that this girl has been in the country for so many years, and she is actually better than before, smarter than many times. Wang Deifu smiled stiffly, "We are all a family, and we all recognize Dad's handwriting. Besides, even if there is no letter, we still believe what the little sister said." The patriarch nodded and asked Wang to take out the letter. Everyone compares it together, and it is naturally identified as true. That room should belong to Baiyun or Baiyun. Although your family has been separated for many years, you can still get one room, right? The Zhao family and the Zhou family pretended to be poor before. It was bullying the Wang family for not returning for many years and not knowing the inside. It's so foolish, a few people don't dare to tell lies now. Naturally, it is given. Wang Deifu smiled, however, but you also know that the 2 rooms in the family are now very populated, and we didn't know in advance that the room was left by the parents. My sister-in-law has been allocated to my daughter-in-law earlier. If my sister wants to live in, she has to clean up for a while. The patriarch was invited by the Wang family. Before he came, he thought that the Wang family was making a big fuss. It was just a room. The brothers of the Wang family were so wealthy, how could they have such a thing from her? But the Wang family was the most beloved child when the second elder of the Wang family was alive, and the patriarch still ran away with the old love in mind. I didn't expect these 2 brothers to actually dare to do this in front of their uncles. You can imagine what kind of face they have towards the Wang family in private. Wang was not very surprised, because a few hours ago, Guyan said to Wang, "Although it is 2 aunts who are in trouble today, but they are not young anymore, old man." The old wives have been living all their lives, and their meaning is naturally the meaning of their uncle. Although my mother has written letters from my grandfather, it is difficult to guarantee that they will make excuses to delay, or that the family can't vacate the room, or that the room it's old and needs time to repair. It's my mother who invited my uncle to be the master. As long as they keep dragging it, the uncles are all old. Can they manage it for a while or a lifetime? Why don't you just convert it into cash, money, and goods? It's over. When we get the money, we'll buy our own little yard, and keep them far away from each other and keep them clean. It was also Guyan's idea to invite the elders of the clan to come forward, and after saying so much, Mrs. Wang saw that she was more organized in her work and speech, and thanks to her thoughtfulness before, she followed her advice. I didn't think about it, but I really let my daughter-in-law make the calculation. So Wang was not surprised, only said, "Big brother is right, so I didn't want to live in. Why don't you fold that house into silver and give it to me?" The patriarch's expression darkened, and he nodded, "Yes, since you can't spare the room and turn it into money and hand it over to Baiyun, the same is true. This will also save the juniors in your house from moving around." Sister-in-law Zhao couldn't help muttering, "How old is that house? How can an old house be converted into silver?" The man said something serious, but he didn't ask you what to say. The patriarch looked at Zhao Shi unhappily, and shrank her neck at her, even with Zhou Shi who wanted to help. "Choose to shut up." Wang also looked at the 2 sisters-in-law and sneered again and again, "I don't dare to ask for more, just convert it to me at our market price. But let's talk about the ugly front. My parents stayed in the past. The house given to me is new, and now it is in dilapidated condition. Even though it has been a long time, it must be man-made. This man-made depreciation fee cannot be counted on my head. Finally, the patriarch came forward and said a compromise price 20 taels of silver. 10 taels of silver are enough for ordinary people to chew for a year. 20 taels are not a small sum. But the whole old house of the Wang family is worth hundreds of taels. The big house on the north side has 2 hoods and a small patio. If you build a small kitchen in the yard, it will be separated into a sparrow with all the internal organs. Small yard, in this prosperous area, it is very common to sell dozens of taels. Of course this is an ideal state. The reality is that the 2 old Wang family only mentioned the house in their letters, not the ground. The ownership of the well is also up for debate, and the brothers of the Wang family will not let her separate the walls. The Wang family didn't even have the money to build a kitchen on the partition wall. So the patriarch said the number 20 tuo. The people of the 2 houses of the Wang family were naturally reluctant, but the patriarch said something, and the price was really fair. The patriarch is also a fair man, and he wrote a contract at the back for Wang to press his fingerprints, indicating that the house has been sold to 2 brothers. Uncle stayed for dinner. At the back of the table, the patriarch must have cared a few words about Wang, and asked her how she had been in these years, and how she was lucky enough to survive the flood unscathed. The previous question is easy to answer, and Mrs. Wang directly told her uncles about the suffering of these years. The following question was also asked by Mr. Zhou, and Mrs. Wang made a coincidence at that time. To the patriarch, it is not easy to dismiss it with a single sentence, so the Wang clan cried, "A month ago, I heard that his father and my eldest son are gone, and I will stay there. I had nightmares all night long. I really had a dream about my father one night. In the dream, he kept telling me to take the children away. When I woke up, I felt uneasy, so I left with the children. Only escaped the catastrophe. Such a catastrophe, it can be seen that it is a blessing." The patriarch gave Wang Deifu and Wang Degi a meaningful look. The meaning couldn't be more obvious. Your sisters all had such a miserable life, and finally saved a life. You brothers don't say help, but you still want to leave the house that your parents left for her, really black heart. In the end, Wang Deifu, the eldest brother, said, "I'm sure the little sister will be able to be very happy in the future. I don't know what to do in the future." The 20 taels of silver have been given away, and Wang Deifu is afraid that he will not be able to get rid of the burden of the Wang family. He clearly knows that the patriarch is fair and right now, although he is helping the Wang family to get ahead, but the Wang family is an out-married woman. However, Mr. Wang didn't have any intention of taking advantage of them, so he said, "It's not a big plan, thanks to a few uncles who are in charge, and get the 20 taels of silver left by this father and mother. Rent a small yard to live in first, and let King I's daughter-in-law take care of herself, and then I will do some cleaning and sewing to support the family. Don't worry, brother, even if I beg for food, I won't beg your house." "What are you talking about, girl?" Wang Deifu laughed dryly. When the uncles left, Wang stopped holding it, clutching the purse on his chest and ran to the inn. In the inn, Guyan was taking Xiaowen to eat dinner, because there was no money. Of course, the food was very ordinary, that is, dry biscuits mixed with hot water. Looking up and seeing Wang Shidianer entering the door, Guyan unconsciously brought a smile. "Mother, are things going well?" Wang squatted down beside them, poured a gulp of hot water first, and then said, "It went well. As you might expect, my 2 brothers are not good things either. Dared to talk nonsense in front of the patriarch, dragged me and didn't want to give me that house. Later, I said it according to what you taught, and the patriarch was watching, so they could only convert the house into silver money and give it to me." Speaking of this, Mrs. Wang smiled so much that her eyes were crooked. She got up and closed the window and door, took out 2 large silver ingots and placed them in front of Guyan as if offering treasures. "Look, 20 taels of silver." Guyan's eyes are also bright, and the cost of doing business is here. Wang Shi looked amused, stretched out her hand and slapped her head, "Look at you little money fan. Guyan touched her forehead and smiled, "Mother, I think we will have to spend money for food, clothing, housing, and transportation in the town in the future, and it will definitely not be enough for you to sew and wash. Not to mention, Wuan is also old and has reached the age of enlightenment." Wang Shi stopped laughing when he heard the words, but became worried again. "Can I not know what you are talking about? But how expensive is it to go to school? It takes 5 or 6 taels of silver for the repair. That's why our old show in the village has paid less for the friendship between the two families. When you arrive here, you can't pay a dozen or two in a year. Is it to take all the 20 taels? It's only enough for Wuan to read for 2 years, what kind of name can he learn?" "Yes." Guyan nodded in agreement, "That's why we use money to make money, and it's only when we make money." "What did Wang say, you still bred these 20 taels of silver? Can we do a little business?" Wang Shi immediately shook his head, "How can business be so easy to do? Our family doesn't have any skills, what kind of business can we do? I think we can do some food and sell." Wang's head shook even more like a rattle when he heard the words, "I'm a good cook, and it's not a big deal for you to learn from me when you were a teenager. I almost ordered the stove. Can we sell the food we make?" Guyan had long expected her reaction. After all, the change in temperament is easy to explain, but the craftsmanship cannot be conjured out of thin air. But fortunately, she had already prepared her speech. "Actually, before coming to Hanshan town, I had a dream one night. Wang,